How worried should you actually be about the amount of saturated fat in your diet? In this week's episode of Science and Strategy, we explore a study of 135,000 people over 18 countries who were followed up for about 7.5 years. The study measured heart disease, heart attack, heart failure, stroke, and overall mortality. In this week's episode, we're going to be exploring an analysis of the PURE study. And the name of this article is Associations of Fats and Carbohydrate Intake in Cardiovascular Disease and Mortality in 18 countries from 5 continents. PURE, a prospective cohort study. Catchy name, I know. This article was published in the Lancet in 2017, and the lead author was Dr. Dehghan. So what are we looking at today? So as I say, what we're looking at is an article that's analysing the results from a big study called the PURE study. So what in the world is the PURE study? Well, the word PURE stands for Prospective, Urban, Rural Epidemiology. So what does that actually mean? Well, epidemiology means a study of people over time to find out how things like diet and nutrition and lifestyle impact their health. This is a study of 135,000 people aged between 35 and 70 years old. The participants were spread over 18 countries on 5 continents, although I've got to add, most of the participants were in Eastern countries and lots of them were in rural communities as well. So it was a bit biased towards Eastern rural communities. The average follow-up time was 7.4 years. So when you take the fact that this was a study of 135,000 people and the average follow-up time was more than 7 years, we're looking at more than 1 million years worth of data overall. What the PURE study was measuring was mortality, and that's just a fancy word for dying during the study period, heart disease, heart attack, heart failure, and stroke. So the way the study works is that people were divided up into groups based on their macronutrient intake, and specifically they were divided up into 5 groups for each macronutrient, with those who ate the smallest amount of that macronutrient all the way up to those who ate the largest amount of each macronutrient. Now, the top 20% and the bottom 20% in this study are known as the top quintile and the bottom quintile. And what this study did is it compared the top quintile of macronutrient intake with the bottom quintile of macronutrient intake, and then measured how that impacted mortality, heart health, and things like stroke as well. So basically, what that really means is it's comparing having a lot of something with having not a lot of something and seeing whether it makes you more or less likely to die in the next 7 years. And here's what the study found. The first one might be no surprise to lots of people, which is that monounsaturated fats, so that's the kind of fat that we're told to eat. It's the fat that's found in avocados and the fat that's found in extra virgin cold pressed olive oil. Those who ate the highest amount of monounsaturated fats were 19% less likely to die during the study than those who ate the lowest amounts of monounsaturated fats. So basically, monounsaturated fats appear to increase our life expectancy. The next one was a surprise to me, which is polyunsaturated fats actually reduce mortality even more than monounsaturated fats. I was surprised by this. I thought it would be the other way round. So what are polyunsaturated fats? The most healthy form of this is probably omega-3, which we're told to eat. Omega-3 is found in wild fatty fish, so good sources include mackerel, salmon, cod liver oil, if you can stomach it. I personally can't. Herring, and then we have seeds like flax seeds and chia seeds as well are quite high in omega-3. So what this means is those who had the highest intake of polyunsaturated fats were 20% less likely to die over the study period of anything than those who ate the lowest polyunsaturated fats. So far so good, but this might be a surprise to some people watching, which is saturated fats This is the kind of fat that is solid at room temperature that most of us are told to avoid. Those who ate the highest level of saturated fats were 14% less likely to die over the study period than those who ate the lowest level of saturated fats. So saturated fats are fats that are solid at room temperature, and they're found in dairy products, they're found in cheese, they're found in butter, they're found in ghee. In fact, ghee is essentially the fat from butter with the protein taken out, so it's much safer to cook at higher temperatures. Saturated fat is also found in high quantities in coconut fat as well. And our saturated fats are probably, based on what I know, probably the very safest fats to cook in because they don't get corrupted as much when you heat them up, unlike vegetable oil, which lots of us have in our kitchens. So in summary, those who ate the highest level of saturated fats were 14% less likely to die over the study period than those who ate the lowest level of saturated fats, which is probably a surprise to a lot of people because many of us have been told since the 1970s and 80s, don't eat saturated fats, limit them as much as you can. You need to limit them to improve your heart health. In fact, total fat intake, so those who ate the highest amounts of fats, was linked to a 23% reduction in mortality over the study period. So those who ate the highest amount of fat in their diet were 23% less likely to die over the study period than those who ate the lowest amount of total fat. So I would suggest from this, don't just choose, I'm going to get all my energy from monounsaturated fat. You would have to eat hundreds of avocados to get all your energy. You wouldn't actually have to eat hundreds of avocados. You would have to eat lots of avocados to get all of your energy from the kind of fat that's in avocados. But the overall message here is we shouldn't be particularly worried about total fat in our diet, and we shouldn't be particularly worried, according to this study, by saturated fat in our diet as well. However, so far, all the different macronutrients we've looked at have reduced mortality, which means they make you more likely to live longer, except this macronutrient, which is carbohydrate. Overall, the study found those who eat the highest level of carbohydrate were 28% more likely to die over the study period than those who ate the lowest level of carbohydrate. Now, I mentioned earlier that in this study, there were a lot of participants who lived in rural China. And so for this reason, we can probably deduce that lots of the carbohydrate that they were eating is something like white rice, which is going to be extremely high in starch, which causes a lot of problems for our body. It releases a lot of insulin, and high levels of starch in our diet are linked in quite good quality evidence to future insulin resistance. And that's the underlying cause of many problems, from type 2 diabetes to heart disease, even to depression and some mental health disorders as well. So what we find from looking at this chart is the more fat that people eat, the longer they are likely to live, according to this study, and the more carbohydrate that you eat, the shorter time you're likely to live, and the more chance there is of you dying in the next few years. The study also found that neither total fat nor saturated fat were associated with heart disease, with heart attack, or with shorter life expectancy. So really challenging that assumption that fat in your food is bad for your health and bad for your heart. This study really throws that into question. In fact, the study also found that the highest consumption of saturated fats was associated with a 21% reduction in strokes compared to the lowest consumption of saturated fats. And this is actually really concerning because many people in the Western world live in countries where the recommendation is that we limit our saturated fats considerably, we limit our total fats, and instead we get our energy from carbohydrates. And according to this study, that's really not good for us and is increasing our chances of dying in the next couple of years. In fact, the abstract of this analysis published in the Lancet ends with the words, and I quote, "Global dietary guidelines should be reconsidered in light of these findings." Now, this is not the only study that finds that our global dietary guidelines are potentially causing a real problem to our health, but I like this one because it's quite easy to get into and compare the different kind of macronutrients and see how they impacted the life expectancy of the people in the study. The only thing I've got to say is we do have to bear in mind that this is only one study. And yes, it's large and seems to have been quite well carried out, but it is disproportionately based on people who live in Eastern countries in the world and who live in a rural setting. So we have to take it with a pinch of salt. There are many other studies, though, with good quality evidence that find similar things to this, but I personally quite like the Pure study because it makes it quite easy to look at the different types of fats and how they might impact us. So how do you apply this knowledge to your life? One of the main takeaways that I receive from lots of recent evidence is that our current dietary guidelines might actually pose a real problem to our metabolic health, to our physical health, and to our mental health. And according to this study, our life expectancy in general. So I would say when it comes to diet and nutrition, absolutely keep an open mind, work with people who understand the recent data and aren't dogmatic about the dietary guidelines that were set decades ago before this high quality data started to be received.